Well, on Remembrance Day, we pause to remember those who fought and those who gave their lives during Canada's wars. But there are a group of people who don't tend to get much attention: military chaplains, those who minister to the troops during times of war and during times of peace. Here to talk about the role that they play is our faith columnist, John Longhurst. Hi, John.
Hey, good morning.
I love this angle on Remembrance Day. I don't think I've ever done a full interview about chaplains. But what do we know about the history of them in our military?
Well, chaplains, and by that I mean religious clergy, they've served in Canada's military since the War of 1812. And during the First World War, there were over 500 chaplains who served the military. In World War II, that number rose to 1,400. At least 16 chaplains were killed in the two world wars in the Commonwealth forces, and today there are over 400 regular and reserve chaplains in the Canadian Armed Forces.
So that's by the numbers. What do they actually do during wartime?
Well, of course, they preach sermons. That's something that all clergy do, but they also tended to the wounded in battle during wartime, and when men died, they helped bury them, and they often wrote letters home to the dead man's families. They provided pastoral care and counseling to young men who were alone and scared and far from home. And they also organized recreational and social events. One thing they never did was carry weapons. That's forbidden by the Geneva Convention. And Canada has always strictly adhered to that rule. And that included when troops were deployed to Afghanistan more recently.
Do we know what most members of the military, do we know what they think of chaplains?
Well, sure. The Canadian military surveys its members, and they found that most view them with appreciation and respect. And soldiers had a special respect for chaplains who shared the dangers and challenges with them during wartime, especially those who served close to the front lines. They could be much less sympathetic to those who were far back from the front lines where there was no danger.
Can you give us some examples of actual people like chaplains who served in the past?
Sure, I'd love to do that because that's where it really becomes real and human. And one of them was George Anderson Wells. He was an Anglican priest who served with Manitoba's Fort Garry Horse during the First World War, and he became known as the fighting bishop because he chose to stay so close to the front lines. He became the most decorated chaplain in the Commonwealth forces during that war. Then there was Father Rosaire Crochetier. He was with Quebec's Royal 22nd Regiment, the Vendus. He was killed in 1918, helping to evacuate the wounded. He was highly respected by the men of his regiment, who considered him a father, a brother, a confidant, and a friend. But perhaps the most famous Canadian chaplain was John Weir Foote. He was a Presbyterian minister from Madoc, Ontario, and on August 19, 1942, when the Canadian forces attacked Dieppe, he was with the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry. For 8 hours, Foote helped care for the wounded on the beach, often leaving his first aid post so that he could tend to them, risking his own life. And near the end of that disastrous battle, Foote helped wounded soldiers get onto landing craft to take them back to safety in England. But when offered a chance to go back to England and be safe himself, he declined to do that. And he went back to the beach saying, "The men on the shore are going to need me more than the men in England." And, of course, he was then taken prisoner of war by the Germans along with about 2,000 other Canadian soldiers. And while there in a prison camp, he preached, and he tried to do what he could to keep up morale by serving the men. When the Second World War ended, Foote was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest honor that anyone in the military can get in Commonwealth forces. And he was one of only 4 Commonwealth chaplains in all the wars to receive that award, and the only Canadian chaplain to do so.
Can you imagine, right, saying, send me back, they need me more on the beach? Mm-hmm. Like really that moment of bravery, that moment of integrity,
just
of
turning around
fortitude.
And walking back. Yes.
Tell us about someone else, Captain Walter Brown of Peterborough, Ontario.
Sure. Captain Brown was the first Canadian chaplain to land on France on D-Day. He spent his time tending to the wounded and helping to bury the dead. Unfortunately for Captain Brown, he was captured by a Nazi Hitler Youth unit on June 7, and he was executed. He was the only chaplain executed during the war. Brown is buried in France, but the communion kit he used overseas was donated to Huron College in London, Ontario, where it is still used in worship services today.
Speaking of today, is chaplaincy different today than it was in the past?
Oh, absolutely. It's way different. And for one simple reason, during the wars, during the First World War, military chaplains in Canada were exclusively Christian, either Protestant or Roman Catholic. The first Jewish chaplain was appointed in World War II. But today, chaplains in the Canadian military reflect the nature and character of Canada itself. So they come from Christian, Muslim, Indigenous, Jewish, Sikh, Buddhist, and humanist traditions now. They're just like the men and women they serve, in other words, who also come from many different religious backgrounds, or, in many cases, no religious background at all. And when asked, many members of the military say they appreciate the work of these chaplains for the spiritual and emotional support they provide, even if the members of the military aren't religious themselves.
Any final thoughts on this subject?
Sure. It used to be said, there's an old adage, that there's no atheists in foxholes. And by that they mean when things get rough, when your life's in danger, everybody becomes religious and they pray. Well, that may or may not be true today, because I think there's probably as many atheists in Canadian military foxholes as there are atheists in Canada itself, just as there are as many agnostics and members of many different other religions. And what I did find out as I looked into this is that the Canadian Chaplaincy Corps is doing everything it can to serve those Canadians the best way possible these days.
Thank you for the history and also for the current understanding of chaplains.
You bet. Thank you.